evening. Oh, it's so hot. It's so hot. And we are so grateful that Mercantile Bank is a proud sponsor of tonight's Green Living Series program. We are very fortunate to have none other than the magnificent Miss Mandy Dixon here to teach us about composting one-on-one. Community Homeworks is a nonprofit organization with a mission to empower our neighbors to sustain safe, sustainable, and dignified homes. We get our fundings from grant gifts and donations. So if you feel inclined to donate to us, please do so at our website, communityhomeworks.org. Um, we are ready to get started. There was a bug on me. And Miss Mandy Dixon is here, and we are grateful that she's here.
Thank you. Good evening. We are going to go through composting. This is going to be a guide where you'll be able to start as soon as we're done with this. You'll be able to go in your kitchen and get started. So let's go through this. What is composting? Hopefully, if you're tuning in, you'll quickly identify with this, but compost is decomposed organic material, like leaves or vegetable scraps, that once it breaks down, it doesn't break down any further. But the plants can use it at that point. It's used to improve garden nutrients and the soil structure. Decomposition takes place through the work of microscopic organisms like fungi and bacteria and earthworms and sow bugs and millipedes, and a lot of gardeners call it black gold because it's fantastic for your garden beds. So keep calm and compost. 68% of waste thrown away on a college campus can be recycled or composted. So if we could kill 68% of the waste from going into the landfills and actually using it for compost, one, it'll improve our gardens, but two, it'll reduce our landfill and our footprint. So why compost? Well, we just talked about one reason, because we could reduce the amount of landfills. It's a type of recycling. It improves your soil nutrients for your garden. We talked about gardening several times this year. So this is just one additional thing that we keep mentioning in all of these programs, that compost is amazing for your garden. It benefits the soil health. It's very convenient, it's easy to do, and it's absolutely free. You can do it with whatever you have in your house. So we're going to watch this little video, and it is composting in 3 steps. So it's a real short video. Can I start it, or do you need to? There we go. Let me guess. Oh no. 2, 1. There. No. Okay. Momentary difficulties. It was just a minute. We can always skip it if we have to, though. If not, it's okay. Why we're trying to figure this out, composting is basically a step-by-step method of moving all of your lawn waste and, well, a lot of your lawn waste and your garden kitchen scraps and converting them into a compost, which will go into your soil. Are we just gonna? Okay.
As
You
the
can
pile is
put
building and beyond the
peel
time that it reaches ideal size, mix it often. Once a
spoiled
week
stuff,
is good.
rotten
And while
stuff,
you're mixing it, add water to
tomatoes
keep
that
it
went
moist,
bad,
about like a
'cause we
damp
just have those that
sponge.
crack and they're not
Once
good.
the pile reaches the ideal size of 4 by
Also,
4,
you
start a new
potentially take
pile.
those and chunk that up and put it in your compost. There's a lot of different pieces from your kitchen as you're cooking that you can put in the compost. Most people cut off the bottom ends of their broccoli. That's a great piece to go into the compost. There's certain things you do want to avoid, but a lot of the things that you're doing vegetable and fruit wise can be in the, that's okay. Can they hear it online or no? Oops. Well, how about this?
Is it running now?
That's considered an ideal size for home composting to work efficiently. Just never add meat, dairy, or grease. As the pile is building and beyond the time that it reaches ideal size, mix it often. Once a week is good. And while you're mixing it, add water to keep it moist, about like a damp sponge. Once the pile reaches the ideal size of 4 by 4, start a new pile and repeat the process. For the original pile, don't add any new ingredients to it. That's what the new pile is for. But keep turning the original pile while adding moisture about once a week. In approximately 3 months, if you keep with it, the greens and browns will biodegrade to finished compost. You'll know when it's ready when the ingredients are unrecognizable, the internal temperature is ambient, and the contents smell rich and earthy. That is finished compost. And when your compost is ready to use, you can top dress it to an existing bed around your plants about 1 inch thick, or if it's a new bed, you can add it to that soil about 4 inches deep and just mix it all together. Fortunately, a little bit goes a long way. But this recipe for success will not only get you started, but keep you going strong for years to come. And we have a lot more information about composting on our YouTube channel at Joe Gardener TV and on our website at joegardener.com. So come on over and have a look around, and we'll see you.
So the materials needed to make compost. Okay. So again, carbon and nitrogen, those are the two key components, plus water and oxygen. If you have all 4 of those things, you can make compost.
Feedback again?
No.
Oh, it's not. It's not
It's,
advancing now.
nope. It's 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 all good. We can talk about it without the presentation for a little bit. So the combination of browns and greens, if you have too much of your greens, you're going to end up with a very wet, kind of smelly pile. If you have too much of your browns, it's not going to break down because it's going to get dry very quickly, and it won't start the process of breaking down. One of the things that you can do is, other than just kind of keep an eye on your browns and greens, is just kind of watch the pile. If it's starting to get too dried out or it's easier to tell if it's got too much greens because it'll start getting kind of smelly and you'll have a lot of pests. Then it's going to have too much greens. But one of the things, there's a few things to avoid in addition to the compost ratios, but don't compost meat, bones, fish scraps, because they're going to attract your pests. You're going to have some raccoons and you have potentially some dogs, depending on where you have your compost pile. Don't compost perennial weeds or diseased plants. The reason that you don't want to put the weed seeds in there is that the compost pile at home isn't necessarily going to get hot enough to kill off those seeds. So all you're going to do is take those seeds, it'll sit in your compost pile, you'll put it back in your garden, and now you're going to have weed seeds in your garden. And the same thing with diseased plants. You're going to end up spreading those diseases back to your garden because the compost pile at your house just does not get hot enough in order to kill off those diseases and those seeds. Don't allow the compost pile to dry out until the compost is actually complete. So once it smells nice and rich and earthy, it's done. But if it doesn't and there's still a lot of stuff still in it, or you're going to want to keep it moist. It's like a damp sponge. So like when you squeeze out a sponge, about that dampness is what you're looking for. Don't forget to turn your compost pile because it allows oxygen to stay in the whole thing versus it to break down only on the top. If you stir it, you'll keep an even compost. And part of the reason that works is that the bacteria need some oxygen in order to break down the compost. So here's a list of things that can be compost and things that should not be compost. Those of you here in the class, you have a small basic list, a little handout that shows you some of the real basics. This one's a little bit more complete, a little more detailed. So you can compost like cardboard as long as it's uncoated, none of that stuff with the waxy coating. Coffee grounds, filters. So just take your coffee grounds out in the morning and just dump them in your compost bin. Eggshells, fireplace ashes, as long as you're using natural wood only, not composite or trying to burn some leftovers with chemicals. Fruits and vegetables, grass clippings, hair and fur, hay and straw, houseplants. You know, when you kill the inevitable houseplant, because it always happens to everybody at least once. Leaves, newspaper, nutshells, paper, sawdust, tea bags, wood chips, and yard trimmings are some of the things you can compost. Big thing on do not compost is like black walnut leaves or twigs, because it does have some compounds in it that can interfere with your garden. Don't use coal or charcoal ash because it might include some of the chemicals that are harmful to plants. Dairy products and eggs, because again, pests and odors. Diseased or insect-ridden plants, we've already discussed that. Fats, grease, lards, and oils, because again, pests. Meats, fish, bones, and scraps. Pet feces or litter, because you don't really want to put that back into your garden. And yard trimmings treated with chemical pesticides. So if you use a lawn service that comes out and sprays, you're not going to want to use those grass clippings. So there's multiple methods of composting. Some of them are a little more complicated. Some of them are way super easy. So it's just depends on what you want to do and how much energy you want to put into it. So cold composting, you're just going to take a section of your yard. You can barricade it off with some pallets if you'd like, standing them up, put a little barricade, about a 4x4 pile, mix it about once a week like we were just talking about in the video. Keep that moist sponge consistency. It's usable compost the following season. So if you do it this year, get your 4x4, it's ready, it'll compost over the winter, some, and in the fall and spring. By next summer, this time of the year, you should be able to use it. It's very easy, but it is slow, and it is, again, a 4x4 space. So you're going to take a little bit of room out of your yard. There's hot composting, which is much faster. Does it within 6 to 8 weeks, which is way quicker, but you have to be a little more precise about your ratios of browns to greens. You're going to have to make sure you have 2 browns to 1 greens. So browns are like your papers and your cardboards and your dried leaves. Greens are your vegetable scraps. Most people have more of the greens than they have of the browns, so until fall, when you can go and pile it up with your leaves. So if you can keep a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 ratio, thoroughly mix the pile every single week. Keep the moisture pile, and you have to be very consistent with it. If you do that, you can have compost in 6 to 8 weeks. It is faster. It does take some space, and you have to have multiple bins because you'd want to use one. And within, it takes 6 to 8 weeks from the time you stop adding to it. So then you'd have to move to a different bin.
Question.
Yes.
Does it matter whether or not your bin or pile is in the sun versus in the shade?
It's going to require more moisture if it's in the sun, but it'll go a little faster because you're keeping it a little warmer in the sun. But you will have to water it and mix it more often in the sun because of the effects of solar. Vermicomposting. So we're going to talk about worm composting. Vermicomposting, there's a lot of different methods, but this is a 2-bin method. You use a couple of your totes, your Rubbermaid totes, some food scraps, some newspaper, and you need some red worms. They're normally now called night crawlers. And I have an example from my worm bin. I just brought a section in. So what you'll see, and I'll pass this around, is there's some shredded paper. There's a chunk of paper towel in here. There's a couple of decomposing cherry tomatoes that came out of my garden. There's a couple of pieces of peach peel. So, and then there's a couple tops off the eggplant that I cooked last week, or actually 2 days ago. But so this is all in the bin, and then I have the red worms in the bottom, and they will go and they will break down this and turn it into compost for me. So this is just an example of what your compost at home could look like. It's generally easier if you put it in a bin. Be aware it will get very wet, and you do need to have very well secured lids. Those lids probably will let the worms escape, and they do like to try to escape. So you have to make sure they have a nice seal around the top, and air holes, tiny, tiny air holes that are smaller than them so they won't get out. Red worms are required, not your everyday garden worms. Don't go dig them out of your garden and put them in there. They'll eat almost anything, including fruit, vegetable scraps, bread, grain products. If I had some scrap, leftover bread or something that got a little mold on it, you can put that in here. Tea bags, coffee grounds, filters, non-greasy foods. They don't decompose meat, bones, fat, dairy, or non-food items. So don't put those in here. But there is a little bit of there's a link there where you can learn more about vermicomposting. So we'll get those links out to everyone. And it can be done indoors year round. So these guys sit under my sink in my laundry room all year long.
Where do you get the worms?
I got them from a friend, but he purchased them online. There's a couple of different resources that you can purchase them online. I believe some links to purchasing them, to sites that have them, I believe, are in that website. But if not, I can get links to everybody at the end. Another type of composting is called hugelkultur and buried composting. I'll talk about buried first, hugelkultur, and then tumblers after that. So buried composting, for buried composting, all you're doing is you're going to dig a hole. And all of those things we've already talked about that you can put into your compost pile, you're just going to put them in that hole. And then you're going to cover up the hole, and it's going to break down, and that will be create its own compost. It's very easy. It's small scale. You're not going to do anything large in a hole. You just put that hole in your garden over the winter, and it'll break down, and by be able to use that space will have a lot more compost under it than the rest of it. You can just turn that into your bed. But hugelkultur is this picture here. It shows what it is. It's basically a form of composting, and you can grow on top of this. So you'll see that they have the big logs and hardwoods at the bottom. So this is like if you had a brush pile and you have a bunch of bigger stuff in your brush pile and you put that at the bottom of your bed. And then you put some little bit softer stuff on top, smaller stuff on top of that. And basically what you're doing is you're creating wood-based compost. On top of that, you're going to put your twigs and brush and leaves and grasses because those are all going to break down first. So those are, and you're going to put compost on top. You can plant right away in that compost on top. I would suggest you do it though in the fall so it has a little bit of time to start breaking down before spring. But if you stack that up, that bed will be great to compost for years. You won't have to add anything to it. It's going to slowly start diminishing in height as the wood and the different layers start to decompose, and they're going to decompose over time from top to bottom. I mean, technically the bottom will start decomposing, but before it's done, that'll be the last one done. So the goal of this is that you can do some type of permaculture where you can plant in that and just leave it alone, and it will just continue to produce. So if you put, let's say, rhubarb in that, your rhubarb will just continuously be fertilized for the life of that compost or that pile. And that pile is going to last many, many years. Obviously, depending on the amount of wood will determine how long, but something like that could last a good 5-10 years, depending on, again, what you put in it. But the goal is then you could plant up the sides. You could plant lettuces on the outside because you can see you've got a little bit of small stuff on the side. You can plant some lettuces or some temporary annuals on the sides, plant some permanent stuff on the top. And that's a different form of composting. And you're getting rid of some of that if you have a tree down from a storm, for example. Any questions on that? The tumblers is similar to the compost bin. You're going to put the same stuff in the compost bin, but it's a round compost bin, and you literally roll it. Some of them you roll on the ground, some of them are up on stands, and you roll it, and that introduces the air movement. So it's easier for you to stir it instead of having to use a pitchfork or a shovel or something like that. And it just makes it go a little faster. But obviously there's some money involved in getting one of those type of setups or creating one. But you would just add a little water and then mix it every once or twice a week. So what do you use compost for? If we're going to mix it into garden soil, it feeds your plants, help maintain moisture, or you can put it on top of the soil as a mulch. It's just a nice nutrient-heavy mulch. Now, the next section is just some resources, some different websites you can use on general composting, mulch, wood chips. There's actually free wood chips and compost available in Kalamazoo. So if you would like some, this is a way to look into that. There's also an option for free wood chips for mulch. It's called getchipdrop.com. You basically go in, you register your address, and if there's a tree service that has excess chips, they will drop them off in your driveway. You won't ever know when they're coming, and there'll just suddenly be a pile of wood chips in your driveway. So you do have to be prepared for that because they're not going to warn you in advance. You're just going to find it. So, but that is an option for free mulch. And they tell you the details on the website there and some general composting information. Yes.
How much compost can you make at one time? Like, can you make 5 gallons of compost at one time?
Yes, you can. You're limited only by your space and what setup you have. So if you could have 6 4x4s next to each other, and you'll be getting a ton of compost out of those. And you just rotate from one to the other. As they get full, then you move to the next one. So it just depends on how much space you have as to how much you're going to want to make.
What happens if you add compost to your garden that isn't compost?
It will slowly compost into the garden. It's not going to hurt it any. It's just going to look different. You know, you're going to have chunks in your garden bed, which won't hurt anything. It'll just take a little longer to break down. I think there was a question about size of items to put in the compost, Chris. Oh, she is focused. I said you had a question about the size of compost, I believe. This.
Do they have to tear things down small pieces to get them to
Okay. So the question is, do you have to break things down into small pieces in order for them to compost? So there's twofold to that answer. One, it'll make it go faster. So if you break it down into smaller pieces, smaller chunks, it's going to break down faster because the bacteria can get to the surface. They can only get into a certain area, the surface. However, if you put it in big whole chunks, it still will compost. It's just going to take a lot longer. So the question is, because worms are small, do you have to grind it up for the vermicomposting in order for them to actually eat it? And the answer to that is no. They can eat pretty much anything. Again, I take it in smaller pieces so they have more access to it and it breaks down faster. But the worms could handle a whole apple. They do that, and if they really wanted to, they can break down your whole apple. Just take them a lot longer. So it depends on how quickly you're looking for this to break down. I generally chunk things up. So it's, a couple inches at the most. But technically you could throw a whole cabbage in there or a whole apple and they will do it. It's just going to give them some time. Any other questions today? Did I not cover anything? Well, there's a couple things on this I noticed I didn't cover for vermicomposting. So how to take care of your worm bin. So if you do the worms and you get them all set up and they're going great and your worm bin's starting to smell, it's a little too wet, or you're attracting fruit flies, you're going to want to get some layered of cover food scraps with a layer of shredded paper bedding. Basically what you're trying to do at this point is you're going to add some more browns, because the worms are going to eat your greens and they'll eat your browns, but your ratio's off. And that's why your bin is starting to smell or starting to attract things. So you'll just want to add some more browns, add some shredded paper, shredded cardboard. If it's too wet, you can feed your worms less or add more dried leaves, dried shredded paper, shredded cardboard, things like that. And the worms cannot live outside over the winter. They do have to be indoors. They will freeze and die. So you do have to feed your worms. You have to bring them inside, make sure they stay inside. They can't get too hot or too cold, and make sure that they have enough food so they won't die. But if it gets too wet, add more shredded papers. Anything else? Okay, so how many people have a compost bin at home already? You have one? Excellent. What kind of composting are you using? Excellent. So she said that she has a tumbler and buried in ground and the regular above 4x4 type. So the nice thing about this is you can go home, if you're not home already, you can go home and you can start this tonight. You cut yourself an apple, you're going to peel it, take those peels, throw it in a bucket, throw it in a bin, throw it in something. And then tomorrow, take it outside. Set up your place. Either dig a little hole or set up a 4x4 area and just get started. And then you'll have compost too. Any questions?
Are there things that you can find at home that would help if you don't live in a space where you have a lot of space, what kind of things around your home would you recommend to use to get started in composting?
If you don't have a lot of space, you literally could do something similar to a tumbler. If you had a nice tote with a lid that's tight, you can start your pile in that, and you can actually rotate that yourself because it's small and light. You wouldn't be able to get a lot of compost out of that, but that would actually still do it. You just open it up, add a little more compost, shake it up, cover it, and you're going to have time. You'll probably need a couple of those bins, but that would actually work for composting. It's just going to take a little, it's going to be smaller quantities. And you'll have to have at least 2 so you can move into another one. But that's a simple, little, easy way. That could be outside on your deck if you have one, or if you have a little porch, just put it on the corner. So you could have a couple little bin style compost
like those
piles.
Little shoebox
Yeah.
containers.
Yeah, or a little bigger.
A little bigger. Because we taught a class about container gardening. So I know that our participants are used to working in small spaces and just wanted to figure out how to accommodate composting for.
Yeah, if you have a couple of bins a little bigger than a shoebox, you could just stack them, put them in the corner of your deck, of your porch, and just use that. So at least you have a chance to start right away. Anything else today? All right. Well, thank you guys.
Magnificent, Mandy. We are so grateful that you were kind enough to share the infinite amount of wisdom that you have when it comes to composting. I wanted to take the time to also thank Mercantile Bank for being the sponsor of our program. And this is one of our Green Living series. We look forward to doing more Green Living series with Miss Mandy Dixon as we figure out if our thumb is green or brown. Wanted to make sure that I invite you guys to come and join us. We would love to see your face in the place. We're at 812 Bryant Street on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock. And we'll see you next Tuesday.